The courtroom fell silent when the stranger with dust on his boots and a rifle across his back walked through the double doors, his spurs echoing like thunder across the wooden floor. Every eye in that cramped territorial courthouse in Shoshone, Idaho, turned to watch him stride down the center aisle, his jaw set firm beneath a week's worth of stubble, his gray eyes fixed on the young woman clutching an infant to her chest at the defendant's table. It was May of 1883, and Katherine Zimmerman was about to lose everything she loved unless someone intervened. Katherine had arrived in Shoshone 3 months earlier on the westbound stage, pregnant and alone, fleeing a husband who had beaten her so badly she feared for her unborn child's life. She had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and the few dollars she had sewn into her skirt hem, escaping St. Louis in the dead of night while her husband lay drunk in their bed. She had made it all the way to Idaho Territory before her money ran out and the baby came early, born in a boarding house room with only the elderly proprietor to help bring him into the world. The baby, Samuel, was 2 months old now, healthy despite his rough start. Katherine had found work doing laundry and mending at the boarding house, barely making enough to pay for her room and feed herself. She had been managing just barely when the telegram arrived from St. Louis. Her husband, Richard Zimmerman, had tracked her down. He claimed she had abandoned their marriage and stolen his property, namely the clothes she wore and the baby she carried. He demanded her immediate return and had hired a lawyer in Shoshone to represent his interests. Since he could not afford to travel west himself, he had convinced the territorial judge that Katherine was an unfit mother who had kidnapped his child. Now she sat trembling before Judge Harold Morrison, a stern-faced man in his 60s who had already made it clear he believed a woman's place was with her husband, regardless of circumstances. Her court-appointed lawyer, a young man fresh from law school in the East, had done his best, but he lacked experience and conviction. The husband's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man named Percival Hughes, had systematically destroyed Katherine's credibility over the past hour, painting her as a deserter, a thief, and an unstable woman unfit to raise a child alone. "Your Honor," Hughes was saying, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "this woman abandoned her lawful husband without cause or justification. She stole his property and fled across state lines. Now she seeks to raise a child in poverty, working as a common laundress in a boarding house. What kind of life is that for an innocent infant? The child belongs with his father, where he will have a proper home and upbringing." Katherine's lawyer stood shakily. "Your Honor, Mrs. Zimmerman has testified that her husband was violent and abusive. She feared for her life and the life of her unborn child." "Unsubstantiated allegations," Hughes shot back. "She has provided no witnesses, no medical documentation, nothing but her own self-serving testimony. I submit that she fabricated these claims to justify her desertion." Judge Morrison nodded slowly, his expression grave. "I am inclined to agree. Marriage is a sacred institution, and a wife's duty is to her husband. Unless you can provide concrete evidence of abuse, Mrs. Zimmerman, I have no choice but to order the child returned to his father's custody. You will be placed on the next stage to St. Louis to answer for your desertion." Katherine felt the world spinning around her. She clutched Samuel tighter, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered, "please do not take my baby. He will kill us both." That was when the stranger spoke from the back of the courtroom, his voice cutting through the proceedings like a knife through butter. "Begging your pardon, Your Honor, but I have something to say about that." Every head turned. Judge Morrison frowned, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "And who might you be, sir? This is a closed hearing." The stranger walked forward, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He was tall and lean, with the weather-beaten face of a man who spent his days outdoors. Katherine guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27, not much older than her own 22 years. There was something in his eyes, a fierce determination mixed with compassion, that made her heart skip despite her terror. "Name is Caleb Garrett, Your Honor. I am a ranch hand at the Triple Creek spread about 10 miles north of here. I have been working cattle in this territory for the better part of 6 years. That is all very well, Mr. Garrett, but this matter does not concern you. I must ask you to leave. With respect, sir, it does concern me. I was there the night Mrs. Zimmerman arrived in Shoshone. This caught everyone's attention." Hughes turned, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean you were there?" Caleb stood before the judge's bench, his hat in his hands, his voice steady and clear. "I was in town picking up supplies for the ranch. It was late February, cold as a banker's heart, snow coming down heavy. I was loading my wagon outside the general store when the stage pulled in. I saw Mrs. Zimmerman step down, and I could see right away she was in a bad way. She was heavily pregnant, moving careful like everything hurt. When she reached up to pull her shawl tighter, her sleeve fell back, and I saw bruises all up her arm. Dark purple and yellow, the kind you get from someone grabbing you hard and mean." Katherine stared at him, recognition dawning slowly. She remembered that night, remembered a tall cowboy who had tipped his hat to her and offered to carry her small bag to the boarding house. She had been too frightened and exhausted to pay much attention, but now his face came back to her clearly. "That proves nothing," Hughes interjected. "She could have gotten those bruises any number of ways." "I am not finished," Caleb said, his voice taking on an edge. "I walked her to the boarding house because the snow was bad and she looked like she might fall over any minute. On the way, she stumbled, and I caught her arm to steady her. She cried out in pain and pulled away so fast she nearly fell anyway. That is when I saw her face in the lamplight from the boarding house window. She had a bruise on her cheek, mostly hidden by her bonnet, and her lip was split and healing. I asked her if she needed help if someone had hurt her. She just shook her head and hurried inside." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Why are you only coming forward now, Mr. Garrett?" "Because I did not know about this hearing until this morning, Your Honor. I was in town selling cattle when I heard folks talking about a woman being forced to give up her baby and go back to an abusive husband. I asked around and found out when and where. I could not stand by and let that happen without speaking my piece." Hughes stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this man is not a qualified witness. He has no professional medical knowledge. He cannot determine how Mrs. Zimmerman received her injuries." "Maybe not," Caleb agreed, turning to face the lawyer. "But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard from Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house." "Hearsay," Hughes protested. "Mrs. Patterson is in the courtroom," Caleb said calmly. "I asked her to come." An elderly woman in the back row stood up, leaning on a carved wooden cane. Judge Morrison gestured her forward. "Mrs. Patterson, please approach." The woman made her way slowly to the front, her weathered face set in determined lines. She had run the boarding house in Shoshone for nearly 20 years and was respected throughout the town. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Morrison said, "do you have something to add to these proceedings?" "I certainly do, Your Honor. Katherine Zimmerman came to my door in February, barely able to stand, pregnant and terrified. I helped her up to a room and sent for Dr. Waverly. He examined her and told me she had 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising all over her body, and marks around her throat consistent with strangulation. He said it was a miracle the baby had survived. I have his written report if you would like to see it." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for silence. Why was this report not entered into evidence? Catherine's young lawyer stood, his face red. Your Honor, I requested all medical records from Dr. Waverly last week. He said he had destroyed them as per patient confidentiality, since Mrs. Zimmerman had not given explicit permission for their release. That is not entirely true, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. Dr. Waverly kept a copy in his personal files at my request. I was worried something like this might happen. I have it here. She produced a folded paper from her handbag and handed it to the judge. Judge Morrison read the document slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. Hughes tried to object again, but the judge silenced him with a sharp look. When he finished reading, he set the paper down carefully and fixed his gaze on Katherine. Mrs. Zimmerman, is the account in this medical report accurate? Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She held Samuel close, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest. Your Honor, Hughes said desperately, even if we accept that Mrs. Zimmerman was injured, there is no proof that her husband was responsible. She could have been attacked by a stranger or hurt in an accident. Caleb stepped forward again. May I speak further, Your Honor? Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Go ahead, Mr. Garrett. I have given this a lot of thought, sir, about what makes a good parent and what makes a bad one. I grew up in Texas, youngest of 5 children. My father was a hard man, quick with his fists when he had been drinking. I saw what it did to my mother, the way she flinched when he raised his voice, the way she wore long sleeves even in summer to hide the marks. I was 14 when he killed her. Beat her to death in a drunken rage over burned biscuits. They hanged him for it, but that did not bring her back. The courtroom was absolutely silent now. Katherine felt tears streaming down her face as she watched this stranger lay bare his deepest pain to help her. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion, but he continued. I swore that day I would never stand by and let a man hurt a woman if I could prevent it. When I saw Mrs. Zimmerman that night, I saw my mother. When I heard about this hearing, I knew I had to speak up. Your Honor, I have watched Mrs. Zimmerman over these past 3 months. I have seen her in town, going about her business. She is a good mother. That baby is clean and healthy and clearly loved. She works hard to provide for him, even though she barely has 2 nickels to rub together. She has never asked for charity or handouts. She has done everything a good mother should do. And how would you know what a good mother does? Hughes asked snidely. Caleb turned to him, his gray eyes flashing. Because I had one for 14 years, and I saw how she sacrificed everything for her children. I saw how she protected us, even when it meant taking the beatings herself so he would leave us alone. Mrs. Zimmerman ran away with nothing to protect her baby. That takes more courage than most men I know possess. She deserves better than to be sent back to a man who nearly killed her. Judge Morrison sat back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Mr. Garrett, you paint a compelling picture. However, the law is clear on the matter of marriage and parental rights. A husband has legal custody of his children. Unless I can determine that returning the child to his father would result in immediate physical danger, I have limited options. Then determine it, Your Honor, Caleb said passionately. Look at that medical report. Look at the evidence before you. Mrs. Zimmerman's husband broke her ribs while she was pregnant with his child. What kind of father does that? What kind of man nearly kills his own baby before it is even born? If you send her back to him, she will not survive 6 months. And when she is dead, what will happen to that baby? Will he grow up with a father who beats him the way he beat his mother? Will he learn that violence is how a man treats his family? Your Honor, I object to this inflammatory rhetoric, Hughes protested, but his voice lacked conviction now. Caleb ignored him, his attention focused entirely on the judge. Sir, I am just a cowboy. I do not have fancy words or legal knowledge, but I know right from wrong. Sending Katherine Zimmerman back to St. Louis is wrong. It is murder, plain and simple, and this court would be complicit in it. I am asking you, begging you to show mercy, to look at the facts and make the right decision, not just the easy one. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the bench. Finally, he looked at Katherine. "Mrs. Zimmerman, do you have anything to add?" Katherine stood on shaking legs, still holding Samuel. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Garrett said is true. My husband is a violent man. He drank heavily and blamed me for everything that went wrong in his life. The beating that finally drove me away was not the first, but I knew it would be the last I survived if I stayed. I ran to protect my son. That is all I have ever wanted, to keep him safe. If you send us back, we will both die. Please, please do not do that." Her voice broke on the last words, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Caleb found himself moving without thinking, stepping close to her side in a gesture of support. She looked up at him with such gratitude and hope in her brown eyes that something shifted in his chest, a feeling he had not expected and could not quite name. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "I am going to take a brief recess to consider the evidence presented. We will reconvene in 30 minutes. He banged his gavel and stood, disappearing into his chambers. The courtroom erupted in conversation. Katherine sank back into her chair, trembling with exhaustion and fear. Caleb pulled up a chair beside her, his presence somehow steadying. "Thank you," she whispered. "I cannot believe you did that. You did not have to." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "It was the right thing to do. But your mother, talking about that in front of everyone, that must have been so difficult." He shrugged, though his eyes were shadowed with old pain. "If it helps keep you and your boy safe, it was worth it." Samuel chose that moment to wake and begin fussing. Katherine shifted him gently, trying to soothe him. Caleb watched her with an expression of such tenderness that Mrs. Patterson, observing from nearby, smiled knowingly to herself. "How old is he?" Caleb asked. 2 months. He came early, probably because of the stress and the journey, but he is strong. The doctor said he is perfectly healthy. He is lucky to have you." Katherine looked at Caleb, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the kindness in his weathered face, the strength in his capable hands, the goodness in his eyes. "I am the lucky one. If you had not come today, I would have lost him." "The judge has not decided yet," Caleb cautioned, but there was hope in his voice. "I know. But at least now I have a chance. You gave me that." The 30 minutes stretched like hours. Hughes conferred with his associates in hushed, angry tones. Katherine's young lawyer looked hopeful for the first time all day. Mrs. Patterson sat with Katherine, offering quiet encouragement. And Caleb stayed right by Katherine's side, a silent but solid presence. When Judge Morrison finally returned, his expression was unreadable. Everyone stood as he took his seat and banged his gavel for order. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented today," he began, his voice grave. "This has been a most unusual case, and I do not take my decision lightly. The law regarding marriage and parental rights is well established. However, the law also requires that I act in the best interests of the child." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She felt Caleb's hand brush against hers, a fleeting touch of support. The medical evidence provided by Dr. Waverly is compelling and deeply disturbing. The testimony of Mr. Garrett and Mrs. Patterson corroborates Mrs. Zimmerman's account of abuse. While I cannot dissolve her marriage, that being a matter for a different court, I can and will make a determination regarding the custody of the minor child. Hughes stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Zimmerman has every right to his son." "Sit down, Mr. Hughes," Judge Morrison said sharply. "I am not finished. A father's rights are not absolute. When a father has demonstrated such extreme violence against the mother of his child, particularly while she was pregnant, he forfeits his moral claim to that child. I cannot in good conscience return this infant to a man who nearly killed him before birth. Katherine gasped, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Therefore, I am awarding full custody of the minor child, Samuel Zimmerman, to his mother, Katherine Zimmerman. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order against Richard Zimmerman, forbidding him from contacting Mrs. Zimmerman or the child by any means. Should he attempt to do so, he will be subject to arrest and prosecution. Mrs. Zimmerman, you are free to go. The gavel came down with a decisive crack. For a moment Katherine could not move, could not breathe. Then it hit her all at once. She had won. Samuel was safe. They were free. She turned to Caleb, tears of joy streaming down her face, and without thinking threw her free arm around his neck in an impulsive embrace. He caught her and the baby carefully, steadying them both, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you," she sobbed against his shoulder. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "You are welcome," he said quietly, his voice rough. "You both deserve to be safe and happy." Mrs. Patterson was crying openly, and even Katherine's young lawyer looked emotional. Hughes stormed out of the courtroom in a fury, but no one paid him any attention. Judge Morrison watched the scene before him with something that might have been satisfaction, then gathered his papers and departed. As the courtroom emptied, Caleb gently extracted himself from Katherine's embrace, though he seemed reluctant to do so. "What will you do now?" he asked. Katherine wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "I suppose I will continue working at the boarding house. At least now I do not have to fear every telegram or stranger who comes to town. That is good. You have made a life here, such as it is. But yes, it is more than I had in St. Louis." She paused, then added shyly, would you allow me to buy you dinner, to thank you properly?" "I do not have much, but I owe you everything." Caleb smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and open. "You do not owe me anything, Katherine, but I would be honored to have dinner with you if you are sure." "I am sure." They made arrangements to meet at the small restaurant next to the boarding house that evening. Caleb had to return to the ranch to complete his business in town, but he promised to be back by 6 o'clock. Katherine watched him walk away, something fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or anxiety for the first time in years. That evening, Katherine dressed in her best dress, which was not saying much given her limited wardrobe, and arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch Samuel. The older woman was delighted to help, her eyes twinkling with matchmaking glee. "That Mr. Garrett is a fine young man," she said as she took Samuel. "Good head on his shoulders and a kind heart. They are rare qualities." "He saved us today," Katherine said softly. "I still cannot quite believe it. He saw someone in need and did not hesitate. That tells you everything you need to know about his character." Caleb arrived promptly at 6, cleaned up and wearing what were obviously his best clothes. His hair was still damp from washing, and he carried his hat nervously in his hands. Katherine met him in the boarding house parlor, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made her heart skip. The restaurant was small and simple, but the food was good and the atmosphere comfortable. At first, their conversation was somewhat awkward, both of them acutely aware that they barely knew each other despite the intimacy of the day's events. But gradually, they relaxed. Katherine told him about her life before Richard, growing up in a small town in Illinois as the daughter of a shopkeeper. She had married at 19, thinking she was in love, only to discover too late the darkness hidden beneath her husband's charming exterior. "The first time he hit me was 3 months after our wedding," she said quietly, staring at her plate. He apologized, cried, swore it would never happen again. I believed him. But it did happen again and again, each time worse than the last. I kept thinking I could fix it, that if I was just better, quieter, more obedient, he would stop. It took me almost 3 years to understand that nothing I did would change him. He enjoyed hurting me. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand gently. That was not your fault. None of it. He is sick and twisted, and you did nothing to deserve that treatment. My mind knows that. My heart is still learning it. That is understandable. Healing takes time. She looked up at him, grateful for his compassion. Tell me about you, about your life after your mother. It was his turn to look away, old pain flickering across his face. My older brothers and sister tried to keep us together, but it was impossible. We had no money, no family to take us in. We ended up in an orphanage in Houston for a few years, until I was old enough to work. I left when I was 16, headed west, and found work on a ranch in New Mexico. I have been working cattle ever since, moving from place to place, never really settling anywhere. That sounds lonely. It can be, but it is also freedom. No one to answer to but the foreman, no ties to hold me down. He paused, then added softly, though lately I have been thinking that maybe freedom is not all it is made out to be. Maybe having ties, having someone to come home to, maybe that would not be so bad. Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. There was something building between them, something fragile and new but undeniably real. Over the next few weeks, Caleb found reasons to come to town more often than was strictly necessary for ranch business. He would stop by the boarding house to visit Katherine and Samuel, bringing small gifts, a rattle he carved for the baby, wildflowers he picked on the ride into town, a warm shawl for Katherine as the spring evenings grew cool. They would sit on the porch and talk for hours, learning each other's stories, sharing hopes and dreams. Katherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She had sworn she would never trust a man again, never let anyone close enough to hurt her. But Caleb was different. He was patient and gentle, never pushing, never demanding. He treated her like something precious, and he was wonderful with Samuel, holding the baby with surprising confidence and coaxing smiles from him with funny faces. "You are good with him," Katherine observed one evening as Caleb bounced Samuel on his knee. "I helped raise my younger brother for a while before we went to the orphanage. I remember some of it. Do you ever see your siblings now? My sister writes sometimes. She married a farmer in Kansas. My oldest brother went to California during the gold rush, and I have not heard from him in years. The others I lost track of." There was sadness in his voice, the grief of a family torn apart. "I am sorry. That must be hard. It is what it is. You make your peace with what you cannot change and move forward. Is that what you are doing? Moving forward?" He looked at her intently. "I am trying to. For the first time in a long time, I am thinking about building something instead of just drifting." Katherine's breath caught. "What kind of something? A home, a family, a future?" He hesitated, then added, "with someone who might want the same things." She knew he was talking about her, about them. The realization made her heart race. "Caleb, I care about you, more than I expected to, more than I thought I could. But I am still married, at least legally. And I am so broken, I do not know if I can be what you need." He set Samuel gently in his cradle and turned to Katherine, taking both her hands in his. "You are not broken. You are healing. There is a difference, and I do not care about the legal details. You can file for divorce, or we can wait until you are ready. I'm not going anywhere, Katherine. I am here for as long as you will have me." "Why?" she whispered. "You barely know me. Why would you want to tie yourself to someone with so much baggage, with a baby from another man?" Because when I look at you, I see strength and courage. I see a woman who risked everything to protect her child. I see someone kind and smart and beautiful, inside and out. And Samuel, he is part of you, which makes him precious to me too." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And because for the first time since my mother died, I have found someone who makes me want to stay in one place. Someone who makes me think about tomorrow instead of just surviving today." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, but they were good tears this time. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of trusting again, afraid of being hurt. I know. And I will not rush you, we will take this as slow as you need. But I am asking for a chance, Katherine. A chance to prove that not all men are like your husband or my father. A chance to show you what love is supposed to look like." She looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity and hope. Something in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the day she fled St. Louis, began to open. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, yes, I want to try." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. She rested her head on his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, feeling safer than she had in years. Their courtship was slow and sweet, built on friendship and trust. Caleb came to town every Sunday, his one day off, and spent it with Katherine and Samuel. They took walks through Shoshone, explored the surrounding countryside, and talked about everything under the sun. He never pressured her for more than she was ready to give, content with stolen kisses on the porch and the joy of simply being near her. As summer arrived and the Idaho landscape bloomed with wildflowers, Katherine began to heal in earnest. The nightmares grew less frequent. The flinching stopped. She laughed more, smiled easier. Mrs. Patterson watched the transformation with satisfaction, declaring that love was the best medicine there was. In July, Katherine received word that her divorce petition had been granted by a judge in St. Louis. Richard had not contested it, apparently having moved on to a new victim. The news should have brought relief, but instead, Katherine found herself crying in Caleb's arms on the boarding house porch. "It is over," she sobbed. 3 years of my life, all that pain and fear, and it is just over." Like it never mattered. "It mattered," Caleb said fiercely, stroking her hair. "It brought you here to Shoshone, to safety. It brought you to me. I am not saying it was worth the suffering, but something good came from it. You got Samuel, and you got free, and now you have a chance at real happiness. With you, if you will have me." She pulled back to look at him, this man who had become her anchor and her hope. "Are you asking me something, Caleb Garrett?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold band set with a tiny chip of turquoise. "It is not much," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but I have been saving for months. Katherine, I love you, I love Samuel. I want to build a life with you, a real family. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in August in a small ceremony at the Shoshone Community Church, with Mrs. Patterson and the ranch foreman as witnesses. Katherine wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson and the other boarding house residents had sewn for her, simple but lovely in cream-colored cotton. Caleb wore his best suit and looked so handsome Katherine could barely breathe when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Caleb kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Katherine felt tears streaming down her face. Samuel, held by Mrs. Patterson in the front pew, chose that moment to gurgle happily, as if offering his approval. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the boarding house. The community had rallied around the couple, touched by their story. There was food and music and dancing. Caleb held Katherine close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you happy?" He murmured. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You have given me everything." "You gave me purpose," he countered. "You and Samuel, you are my whole world now." The celebration lasted into the evening, but eventually, Caleb and Katherine slipped away to begin their new life together. Caleb had spent the past month building a small cabin on land he leased from the Triple Creek Ranch. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but he had crafted every board and beam with love and care. When he carried Katherine over the threshold, she gasped with delight. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace Caleb had built himself. There was a bedroom for them and a smaller room that he had already set up as a nursery for Samuel, complete with a cradle he had carved and painted. Wildflowers in mason jars brightened every surface, and lace curtains that Mrs. Patterson had donated hung in the windows. "Caleb, it is beautiful," Katherine breathed, turning in a circle to take it all in. "You did all this." "I had help with some of it," he admitted, "but I wanted it to be perfect for you." She set Samuel in his cradle and turned to her new husband, her heart overflowing. "It is perfect because you made it, because it is ours." That night, for the first time in years, Katherine felt no fear when a man touched her. Caleb was patient and gentle, whispering words of love and reassurance, showing her what intimacy could be when it was built on respect and affection rather than violence and control. She fell asleep in his arms feeling cherished and safe, 2 things she had never thought she would feel again. The months that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. She settled into her role as Caleb's wife with joy, transforming their little cabin into a true home. She kept house, tended a small garden, and cared for Samuel, who was growing bigger and more alert every day. Caleb worked long days at the ranch, but always came home eager to see his family, scooping Samuel up and swinging him around until the baby shrieked with laughter, then pulling Katherine into his arms for a kiss that made her toes curl. The Triple Creek Ranch owner, a gruff but fair man named Thomas Whitmore, took a liking to Caleb and promoted him to assistant foreman, which came with better pay and a more secure future. Caleb began to dream bigger, talking about maybe buying their own land someday, starting their own small ranch. "We could raise cattle and horses," he said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Idaho sky in shades of orange and pink. "Nothing huge, just enough to make a good living, give Samuel a legacy to inherit." "That sounds wonderful," Katherine said, leaning against his shoulder. "But I am happy with what we have right now. This little cabin, you and Samuel, it is more than enough." "What if we added to it?" he asked, a teasing note in his voice. She looked up at him, confused. "Added what?" "Another room. Another baby." Her breath caught. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" His hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach, his eyes soft with wonder. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned to me last week that you had been feeling poorly in the mornings. Is it true, Katherine?" "Are we going to have a baby?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "I was not certain until a few days ago. Dr. Waverly confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. I wanted to surprise you." Caleb let out a whoop of joy and lifted her right off the ground, spinning her in a circle. "We are having a baby. Katherine, we are having a baby." She laughed through her tears, clutching his shoulders. "Careful, you will make me dizzy." He set her down gently, immediately solicitous. "Are you all right? You need to sit. Water. Should I get Dr. Waverly?" "I am fine," she assured him, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be all right." "I know, after everything with Samuel, your ribs and all, I want to make sure you are safe." "I am safe. You keep me safe." She cupped his face in her hands. "I am not afraid this time, Caleb. This baby is being made with love, and he or she will come into a home filled with love. It is completely different. I am going to be a father, he said wonderingly. A real father, not just a stepfather. Not that I love Samuel any less, he added quickly. He is my son in every way that matters. I know, and you are a wonderful father to him. You will be just as wonderful to this new baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Unlike with Samuel, Katherine bloomed with health, her cheeks rosy and her eyes bright. Caleb fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, let him do all the heavy work. She found his attention endearing rather than smothering, a sign of love rather than control. Samuel, now nearly a year old and toddling around on unsteady legs, seemed to sense that something was changing. He became more clingy with Katherine, patting her growing belly with chubby hands and babbling nonsense that they pretended to understand. In March of 1884, almost exactly a year after Katherine first arrived in Shoshone, their daughter was born. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Dr. Waverly and Mrs. Patterson in attendance. When Caleb was finally allowed into the bedroom and saw Katherine holding their tiny daughter, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "She is perfect," he breathed, touching the baby's impossibly small hand with one finger. "She looks just like you." "She has your nose," Katherine said with a tired smile. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at his daughter's scrunched-up face and wispy brown hair, Caleb said, "Grace. For the grace that brought us together and gave us this second chance." "Grace Garrett," Katherine said softly. "It is perfect." Life with two small children was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Samuel adjusted to being a big brother with typical one-year-old mood swings, alternating between wanting to help with the baby and being jealous of her. But Caleb and Katherine navigated it together, supporting each other through sleepless nights and teething troubles and all the challenges of young parenthood. On a warm evening in May, as they celebrated their first wedding anniversary, Caleb pulled Katherine into his arms on their porch. Both children were asleep inside, the cabin quiet for once. "You remember this day last year?" he asked, swaying with her to music only they could hear. "I remember thinking I was the luckiest woman alive," she said, "and I was right. I am the lucky one. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a purpose. You saved my life, Caleb, Samuel's life, and then you gave us a new life, one filled with love and safety and joy. I wake up every morning and have to remind myself it is real, that I really get to keep this." "You get to keep it forever," he promised. "I am not going anywhere. This is my home now, here with you and our children. Whatever comes, we face it together." She kissed him softly, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." As the years passed, their life in Shoshone continued to unfold with steady happiness. Caleb's dream of owning land became reality when Mr. Whitmore sold them a parcel of Triple Creek property at a generous price, impressed by Caleb's hard work and integrity. They built a larger house, not grand but comfortable, with room for their growing family. Samuel grew into a sturdy, good-natured boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere, learning about ranching and horses and how to be a good man. Grace was a spirited, bright child with her mother's compassion and her father's determination. In 1886, they welcomed another son, Matthew, and in 1888, twin girls they named Hope and Faith completed their family. Katherine never forgot the fear and pain of her first marriage, but the memories lost their sharp edges, becoming more like old scars than open wounds. She threw herself into community life, becoming known throughout Shoshone for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need. When other women found themselves in situations similar to what she had faced, she was there to offer support and guidance, connecting them with resources, and sometimes sheltering them in her own home until they could get back on their feet. Caleb became a respected member of the community as well, known for his fairness, his integrity, and his willingness to stand up for what was right. He served on the town council and helped establish a fund to assist families in crisis. He never forgot the day he walked into that courtroom and changed the course of 2 lives with his testimony, and he made it his mission to be the kind of man who made a difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb and Katherine returned to Shoshone for dinner at the same small restaurant where they had their first meal together. Mrs. Patterson, now elderly but still spry, watched their 5 children for the evening. As they sat across from each other, older now but with eyes that still sparkled with love, Caleb raised his glass in a toast. "To 10 years of the greatest adventure of my life. To the cowboy who walked into a courtroom and saved me," Katherine replied, clinking her glass against his. "I did not save you, I just spoke the truth. You saved yourself when you ran, you saved Samuel. I just helped make sure you got to keep him. You did more than that. You showed me what love is supposed to be. You gave me a family, a home, a life I never dreamed was possible. And you gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me roots and wings all at once, the freedom to be myself and the anchor of knowing I am loved." They talked late into the night, reminiscing about their journey together, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary moments that had woven together to create a rich tapestry of shared life. When they finally returned home, they found their children asleep in various states of dishevelment, and Mrs. Patterson dozing in the rocking chair. "They were angels," she said with a wink when she woke. "Mostly." After she left, Caleb and Katherine checked on each sleeping child, adjusting blankets and brushing hair from flushed faces. Samuel, now 9, was gangly and growing fast. Grace at 8 was still their little firecracker. Matthew at 4 and the twins at 2 were still so small and precious. "We did good," Caleb whispered as they stood in the doorway of the twins' room. "We did," Katherine agreed. "Look at them, Caleb. Look at this beautiful life we built together." He pulled her close and she melted into his familiar embrace. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. And I love you, forever and always." The years continued to roll by with their joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, economic downturns and personal losses. Mrs. Patterson passed away when Katherine was 35, leaving a hole in their lives but also a legacy of kindness they strived to honor. The children grew and changed, developing their own personalities and dreams. Samuel eventually took over managing the ranch, proving to have his father's steady hand and good sense. Grace became a teacher in Shoshone, passionate about educating the next generation. Matthew went east to study law, inspired by his parents' story and determined to help others navigate the legal system. Hope and Faith, inseparable as always, started a bakery in town that became a community gathering place. Through it all, Caleb and Katherine remained each other's constant. They grew old together, their hair graying, their faces lining, but their love only deepening with time. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, hands entwined, watching the Idaho sunset and counting their blessings. On a crisp autumn day in 1910, as they celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary, Katherine looked at her 73-year-old husband and saw the same man who had walked into that courtroom so many years ago, ready to fight for a stranger's right to keep her baby. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come that day?" she asked. He considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember that I did come. I made that choice and it changed everything. That is what matters, not what might have been, but what is." "What is pretty wonderful," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, pulling her close. "Yes, it is." They had 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and a legacy of love that rippled out through their community in ways they could never fully measure. They had built a life from the ashes of Catherine's past, a life filled with laughter and tears, hard work and sweet rest, ordinary moments and extraordinary love. And it all started with a cowboy who saw someone in need and refused to look away, who walked into a courtroom and spoke truth with such conviction that he turned a case around and saved 2 lives. In doing so, he found his own salvation, his own purpose, his own great love. As the sun set on their long and beautiful life together, Katherine rested her head on Caleb's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for defending me that day." "Thank you for letting me," he replied. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart." "Always," she promised. "Always and forever." And that promise, like all the ones they had made to each other over the years, was one they kept until their final days, surrounded by the family they had built together and the love that had sustained them through everything. They had taken the broken pieces of 2 damaged lives and created something whole and beautiful, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and choosing to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard. Their story became legend in Shoshone, passed down through generations as an example of how one person's bravery can change everything, how love can heal even the deepest wounds, and how family is not just about blood, but about the people who choose to stand by you when the world feels dark and uncertain. Caleb and Katherine Garrett lived and loved and left the world better than they found it, and in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?